Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today at the Cody Firearms Museum, part of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, and they have generously allowed me to take a look at a couple of the really cool guns in their extensive firearms collection. What I have today are two different examples of Winchester's experiments with the M1 Garand during World War II. Now most people, if you look at the basic records of what Winchester did, you'll see that they made M1 Garands and they made M1 carbines. In fact, they were doing a lot more stuff behind the scenes that never quite came to fruition during the war. So these two projects were both taking place from mid-1944 until, well, the end of the war in 1945. At the same time, Winchester was also working on its G30 rifle, which was its version of a magazine-fed semi-auto rifle, which we'll look at in a later video. They were also working on the Winchester automatic rifle, which was their idea for an improvement on the BAR, the Browning automatic rifle. We'll take a look at that in a later video as well. And at the same time, they were also experimenting with magazine-fed and select-fire M1 Garands. So the writing was pretty much on the wall. Everyone knew that the Ordnance Department was interested in an M1, a version of the M1, that would be both magazine-fed and select-fire. In fact, the Ordnance Department's interest really was, they wanted this kind of miracle weapon that would do everything. They wanted it magazine-fed, they wanted it light, they wanted it select-fire, they wanted it to be able to mount a scope. They actually kind of envisioned the thing replacing basically every weapon in Ordnance, in inventory. They wanted it to replace the BAR, the M1, the Thompson, everything. You know, select-fire allows it to function as a submachine gun. They can put scopes on it and make it a sniper rifle. That's an idea straight out of Fantasyland, but that's what people were kind of working towards. So the two elements that these guns represent are adapting the M1 to use a box magazine and adapting it to be full auto. Now the full auto adaptation really was pretty trivially simple. So this guy up here is both magazine fed and select fire. There's a selector switch up here to go from full auto to semi-auto. And that select fire mechanism was really a very simple modification to make to the gun. So both of these changes were patented by a guy named Harry Seyfried, not entirely sure how you pronounce his name. He was a Winchester employee at the time. And what's interesting is they were much more interested in getting the magazine conversion patented than the select fire conversion. He applied for a patent on his magazine conversion in 1944 and it was granted in 45. It wasn't until 1948 that he actually even applied for a patent for the select fire modification. And like I said, the select fire really was a trivial change, very simple. The magazines are what turned out to be the difficult part. So this guy actually uses a modified BAR magazine. This is a very short one, probably 5 rounds. They mostly were experimenting with 20-round BAR mags, especially in full auto. This rifle back here has a very much different proprietary interesting magazine, and we'll take a close look at that magazine in a minute. But they ran into problems with the BAR magazines. They're just not very good magazines. In the BAR, they work because you have a long receiver, a slow rate of fire, and you've got a lot of space behind the magazine where the bolt is traveling. So the magazine has plenty of time to push an extra cartridge up into position to feed. The M1 is a shorter receiver, the bolt's moving faster, and there's a lot less time available for that magazine. If you think about it, when you really slow things down in a semi-automatic rifle, the magazine, the top cartridge, can't move up into a feeding position until the bolt has completely cleared it in the back of the magazine. Once that happens, the spring has to push that cartridge up in that little split second between when the bolt is going backwards and clears the mag, then it hits the back of the receiver, or the end of travel, comes forward, and there's just this tiny amount of travel and a tiny amount of time for all that to happen. And the BAR mag just wasn't all that good at it. And through this development program, they consistently had trouble with BAR mags. Now, this is a modified BAR magazine. This is probably one of the earlier Winchester experiments. The receiver is actually, it's an unnumbered receiver that's been marked number 3 experimental. Doesn't have the usual roll marks on it. So probably a wartime modification, I expect. There aren't any really good records on this particular rifle. But just to give you an idea, this gun, when they tested it in 44 and in 45, had a rate of fire of 955 rounds per minute, which is phenomenally fast, far too fast in 30-06 to be practical, and the test results make note of that. But it was so fast that with a full 20-round BAR magazine, they were having trouble with the recoil impulse shaking the magazine back and forth. Would actually, the tips of the cartridges, the tips of the bullets, would actually leave dimpled indentations in the front strap of the magazine. And they note that that was actually causing additional friction, which was leading to feed problems. So you can imagine the amount of energy transfer going on required for the cartridges to actually dimple the front of the magazine like that. Really impressive things going on there. So this experiment, the full auto was easy. Converting a BAR mag was fairly simple. It was difficult getting them to work 100%, but those two things combined weren't that difficult to do. And so Winchester took that approach. This was one of their several attempts to get basically a leg up in this select-fire magazine-fed rifle competition that everyone knew was coming. It wasn't really formalized, but Remington was working on it, and Springfield Armory was also working on it. And so Winchester wanted to try and get in as well. So they had the complex approach, which was the G30 rifle, which, like I said, is a subject for another video. And they had the simple approach, which was modifying the M1. Now, ultimately, none of these projects really went anywhere. In order for Winchester to win anything in this sphere, they really would have had to come up with a solution that was substantially better than what Springfield and Remington were coming up with. And ultimately, they weren't able to. Although they did end up in a position to be manufacturing M14s, which is the ultimate resolution of this whole project. It just took a lot of years to get there. Now, let's take a closer look at both of these. We'll take a look at this magazine, which is pretty interesting just on its own, and what Winchester is doing with these guns. All right, so here's the first one we're going to look at. This is, as far as I can tell, one of the wartime experimental guns. In fact, all of its markings are hand scribed. You can see they polished off the finish there. The back of the receiver here, number 3, EXP. And then we have, let's see if we can get it. Yeah, lightly electro-penciled into the op rod is also EXP. And of course the bottom here is pretty much hand-fitted. Now, this gun appears, as best I can tell, to match Harry Seafried's patents, both for the magazine and for the full auto modification. In order to remove the magazine, you take your catch here and push it backwards. Hold it back, and we'll pull out the magazine. This one's a little tight. That's not necessarily how they all would have been. These are pretty much handmade. So they're using the rear catch, and they've also got this large front catch in the magazine. It's interesting. It's kind of cool. When we take this apart, you'll see it. This one catch actually operates to both the front and the rear magazine catch inside the gun. Now, the front end of this rifle is totally standard M1. In fact, one of the appealing elements of this full auto conversion was that it only required 3 new parts, and the magazine conversion only required a couple as well. So disassembly is just like a standard M1. And use my universal gun disassembly tool here. We'll pop the trigger guard open. We can pull this. The difference here is because this selector lever is up on top of the stock. Normally with an M1 you would open the trigger guard and then you'd pull the trigger group out and then you'd pull the receiver out of the stock. The trigger group stays in the stock because of that switch until the receiver is out. There we go. So let's start with the receiver here. This is the trip lever, which is in there for the full auto conversion. And then you can see that the sides of a magazine box have been added. Cleverly, the mainspring here has been used to provide tension for the magazine catch. And then, looking up close, you can see that the magazine catch comes down to here, and this used to be the clip release. This is now activating the rear magazine catch. So when I pull this lever, this moves backwards. If we look inside here, you can see that piece right here. That moves back, and this bar itself is acting as the front magazine catch. So doing that operates both of them. The front catch locks under this tab, and the rear catch locks under that tab. Pretty cool. Now, like I mentioned, this is a modified BAR magazine. Some of the documentation surrounding this project mentions that the bolt would lock open on the follower. This particular magazine, the follower has been cut down at an angle to prevent that from happening. So this rifle deliberately does not lock open, but some of the others did. Now the trigger group we can pull forward and out. And it's a pretty simple modification that they made mechanically here. Basically, this lever simply locks the disconnector and prevents it from catching the hammer. So more or less, the hammer simply follows through and keeps firing when you have this in the full auto mode. Really very simple. All they had to do was add this lever and modify a couple of the other parts in there. Now, the problem with a system like that is that it goes really fast. Some of the correspondence between Winchester and the Ordnance Department mentions that they did do some work on a rate reducing mechanism, but at the time of the writing, this was very preliminary, and Winchester never did come out with a rate reducer for the M1. The project simply didn't get that far. All right, here's our second prototype rifle. Now this one is a regular M1 receiver. Unfortunately, this one is missing its actual magazine catch, so the magazine slides in but doesn't stay in place. Take a look at this in just a moment. What I find interesting about this gun is they were clearly only interested in making this into a magazine-fed gun because the action is still basic, unchanged semi-auto. What they did was modify this floor plate to be larger. If you look closely, you can see that a piece of wood has been spliced into the front of the stock here in that area. And there we go. And this is a totally normal M1 trigger group. So semi-auto only with this big extra magazine well guide on it. Now this rifle doesn't want to come out of its stock very easily, so I'm not going to force it. But you can take a look in there and see that they haven't really done all that much to the receiver. They didn't add a magazine box the way they did to the other one. All right, so our modified, well, it's not even modified. This is a brand new production made from scratch, I suspect, magazine for 30-06 in a mag-fed M1. They've done a number of things to the follower. This is very much reprofiled compared to the BAR magazine. The most interesting thing here, though, are the feed lips. The feed lips on this magazine are really weird in that they are actually spring-loaded and folding. So they go all the way down, like that, on both sides. And those are the only bits of feed lip that are on this magazine. Everything else is just open. So I believe, if I had to go out on a limb, because I don't have any original documentation from Winchester on this, but I would suspect that these feed lips are made very short in order to minimize friction so that the bolt can strip a cartridge out without losing, well, with losing as little velocity as possible. And then the spring-loaded bit, the best guess I can come up with would be to facilitate stripper clip loading, perhaps, so that when you go to load it with a clip, the follower can go down and these two feed lips both fold in out of the way. And then when the cartridges snap back up, they come up. Beyond that, honestly, I'm really not sure exactly why they went with it. I certainly know why they didn't make this a finalized product, because doing all that sort of manufacture on a magazine would be tremendously expensive and impractical. There you go, guys. 2 of Winchester's several experiments into select-fire and magazine-fed BARs during and just after World War II. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was a very cool chance to get a look at 2 totally one-of-a-kind rifles. As I mentioned, these are in the collection of the Cody Firearms Museum. When you come down here to take a look, they may be out, they may be not, but they've got something like 4,000 guns on display here. It's really a phenomenal collection, and I would strongly encourage anyone who happens to be in Wyoming, traveling through or living there, to stop in and check out the museum. Thanks for watching.